In the movie Labyrinth, Sarah enters a peculiar world that seems to be too whimsical and imaginative to be real. Naturally, the story itself is fiction, but what about within the film? Was anything real? Did the events from Toby being captured to Sarah rescuing him from the Goblin King all take place in her head? The story of Labyrinth began as a movie. The published stories came afterwards. And though the novelization by A.C.H. Smith might reflect Jim Henson's vision, and other works may have contributed as inspiration, it is the movie produced by Jim Henson that is the basis of the story. So was the Labyrinth a real place? The official statement given by Henson himself is that it was a dream. He said, Sarah lives in her own little imaginary and fantasy-laden world. Dreams are very important to her. When she goes into the dream world, which makes up the whole film, she plays a role that recalls the way she feels about the real world. That makes it clear that Jim Henson intended the events of the Labyrinth to be a dream. What complicates his intent is that he didn't write a book, he made a movie, and what started off as a first draft didn't end up on screen. A challenge you run into when filmmaking, despite trying to stick to the original concept, is that you constantly adapt the story to the audience. You want to make it interesting. You create mystery, but you might also introduce ambiguity, which obscures the original intent. In the case of Labyrinth, since the original story was not an adaptation of a book, the only version that carries weight is the final draft, and the final draft is what appears on screen. That is the source of the debate. Were the events in the Labyrinth real? For those who argue that the events were a dream, there is compelling evidence. In Sarah's bedroom, nearly all the elements of the Labyrinth pre-exist. Her toys and books reflect what she encounters, like the statuette of the Goblin King, and a game that looks like a maze. Even the dolls represent creatures she meets, such as a figurine that resembles Hoggle. There's a music display that depicts her wearing a white gown similar to the one she wore at the ball, and on the wall is a lithograph of a staircase like the one she navigates in Jareth's palace. The elements of the Labyrinth are represented by something that already exists in her room. For those who believe that what happened in the Labyrinth was real, there's evidence to support that as well. The most obvious is the final scene when the characters appear in Sarah's bedroom. Jareth seems to be there as well, outside her window in the form of an owl. The movie opens with an owl, which could be interpreted as Sarah's mind inventing Jareth at that point, but it closes with an owl, which is specifically meant for the audience. So it seems as though we are expected to assume the owl really is Jareth, and that he exists in the real world. The entire ending feeds the debate because it's not conclusive. She never even wakes up, but then again, she never went to sleep. There are, of course, minor arguments against the dream theory, such as characters somehow knowing who she is, and scenes that take place when she's not present, but those arguments aren't convincing. A dream can be filled with characters who already know who you are, and if we were watching someone's dream, it would be believable that they wouldn't dream themselves into every scene. So what is the truth? Is the Labyrinth a real place? The original script left no doubt that it was a dream. Sarah wakes up on the floor exactly where she hit her head. There's no owl, and her friends from the Labyrinth do not appear. Despite that, the ambiguous ending suggests the events are real. The filmmakers intentionally put doubt in the minds of the audience. Apparently, the way Henson intended the film to end, with Sarah waking from a dream, wasn't a satisfying conclusion. Without an impactful ending, audiences might hate the entire film, so they changed it. Instead of Sarah physically waking up, we instead get a metaphorical waking up, where she learns how to set aside her fantasies and becomes an adult. At least that's how it was explained afterwards. In an interview, Jim Henson stated, at the end, when she emerges from the dream, from the fantasy, she starts to renounce the foolishness of her childhood. The filmmakers insist Sarah was dreaming, but because they never made that clear in the movie, they are reduced to a psychological explanation that isn't very convincing. From what we see at the end of the film, Sarah is still living in her fantasy. It doesn't appear as though she emerged from her dream, so it's not clear what is actually happening. Perhaps they meant to clear it all up in the sequel we never got. In any case, it seems the truth is, or at least should be, that the Labyrinth was a dream. But it's only technically correct at best. The final scene, when the characters appear in the real world, can't easily be brushed aside. It will always cast doubt on the dream theory. The filmmakers purposely created ambiguity that makes both sides of the argument plausible. So it seems you're technically right no matter which side of the argument you stand on. If you like this type of content, join my Patreon, where you get early access to videos and an exclusive look at a sci-fi adventure.